After 5 days of intense talks early this morning at 1 a.m., Senate leaders announced that they reached a deal with the White House, a bipartisan coronavirus rescue package. Now, the actual final language of that deal, of the bill, is still being hammered out. One thing that seems certain is that it will be the largest economic stimulus package or rescue package in U.S. history. Nearly $2 trillion bill. $1 trillion after we've spent 15 months in the campaign about how you will pay for that, to address the economic fallout of the coronavirus pandemic. The details have been shifting all day as Republicans and Democrats have been fighting over their respective priorities. It remains a very fluid situation. Just one example, the big impasse we seem to be at right now, a group of Republican senators are now threatening to delay the bill because they believe the unemployment benefits are, get this, too generous for low-wage workers. The White House predicted a Senate vote by tonight, but that vote has yet to happen. If and when the Senate passes the bill, the House will have to vote on it before it goes to the president. One of the members of Congress who's been digging through the fine print of the bill all day, Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter of California. She joins us now. I want to note, Congresswoman is currently self-quarantining after experiencing possible symptoms of coronavirus. She's been tested and is awaiting the results. So let me begin, Congresswoman, by asking you how you feel.
I feel tired. I've been sneezing. I spent a lot of the day today and the last week in bed on conference calls, doing the best I can to stay awake, take notes, and follow what's happening. But I'm grateful that my symptoms have been mild to moderate. And I really have a lot of concern about all the public health and everyone out there right now who's either feeling sick or worried about getting sick.
So you've been going through the legislative language. I know that there's a lot circulating around. I wonder if you can give us like maybe a good and bad column in terms of your read on where this is right now, what you like that's in there, what you're concerned about. Let's start with what you think is good that is in this bill.
Yeah, I actually went through the summary of what we believe is going to be in this package. As you know, we haven't seen language yet, and I actually marked it up exactly this way: green, good, red, bad. So here's some of the green good. $100 billion for our hospitals and our healthcare providers. That money is critically needed right now. $45 billion for FEMA disaster grants, and lots of money for state and local government stabilization. All of that is really, really good. Also, some really good news for our small business owners. For the first time, what's on the table is actually grants that would not have to be repaid. So small businesses would be able to get help and not have to worry about repaying it, because it's going to be a long time for some of them until their business recovers. That's the good.
All right. What's marked in red on your copy? What's the bad?
So there's bad news here for patients, which is really concerning to me. One of the things we're told is, well, this bill is going to provide for free testing. Well, I already held the CDC director's feet to the fire to get free testing. Free testing was in our last bill. What's not in this bill is free treatment. That is covering costs for uninsured people who have free treatment, or covering the out-of-pocket costs that people might face for treatment. And those things go hand in hand. A lot of people will hesitate to go get tested if they're symptomatic, if they're worried about the cost of treatment. So that's one of my concerns. It's an area that Democrats know that we have to do better on. My second big bucket of concern is I'm very worried about the accountability measures here. I was very involved in watching the bank bailout with TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. That was $700 billion. Here we're looking at a similarly sized fund. We're told around $500 billion for the largest corporations. But as we saw with TARP, the accountability mechanisms are not strong enough. It's not good enough to have an inspector general or oversight panel on the back end. The money will be out the door and in the pockets of the largest corporations. And I'll give you one example that just specifically really highlights where I think there's an opportunity to still improve this bill. In the bill, there is a up to $10,000 per worker tax credit for businesses that retain employees on payroll. That's terrific. That's going to be a big help in keeping people on payroll. But if you're a small business, you have to choose. Do you want that SBA loan, or do you want that $10,000 worker retention payroll tax credit? If you're a large business, you don't have to make a choice. You can get a bailout and that tax credit. We should put small businesses and large businesses on a level playing field here.
In terms of the mechanics of this, it's a tricky situation procedurally. A lot of members are, some of your colleagues are actually hospitalized. Ben McAdams from Utah, I believe, who has tested positive, has had fairly severe symptoms. A lot are self-quarantining, a lot are away. What is your understanding of how this actually is going to go down as a vote in the next day or so?
So I spent over 6.5 hours today on conference calls, and I have no idea after 6.5 hours how exactly the House is going to be voting on this. We were told no to remote voting. That's been consistent. I think that we've been told no to proxy voting. I think they're expecting people to try to come back. There's still talk about whether or not we could do this with a voice vote or unanimous consent, but clearly members like me who are symptomatic cannot leave their homes. It's a public health risk, and there are a lot of members that are going to have difficulty traveling all the way from the other side of the country to make this vote fast enough. So we're waiting on the Senate to take action. A lot of my colleagues I know are hopping in cars and starting to drive, but those are not people in California, they're not people in Alaska, they're not people in Hawaii. It's gonna be easier for some folks to get there than others. And the problem is my constituents need my voice right now. They need me to be voting in their interests, and it's impossible for me to do that because of this public health crisis.
The final question, it does seem to me, I know that the idea here is to pass this somehow, and there's going to be a recess, and I understand why recesses happen, but the entire world, including me talking to Unite, has been adapting to how you can do your job remotely if you can and how to make it work. It really does seem, if this is going to go on for several months, that Congress is going to have to figure out how to do this remotely, right?
Well, you would hope so. I mean, I think it's wrong for Congress to act like we're an exception. We're asking businesses, schools, nonprofits, healthcare providers, so many different entities to step up in this moment, to meet the moment, and to be flexible and to adapt. So I do think Congress is going to have to do that. I mean, we have had lots and lots of conference calls, so information sharing is happening. But the single most common thing I heard on these conference calls today was, excuse me, you might have yourself on mute. You're going to need to unmute yourself. So it's not easy to do this with several hundred members. And so yeah. I really trust Chairman McGovern, the chair of the Rules Committee, and I know that he, along with Zoe Lofgren, the chair of House Admin, are working to figure out how we can honor our duties to our constituents, but also not risk public health.
All right, Congresswoman Katie Porter, thank you for being with me tonight. Joining me now is Dave Dayen, executive editor of the progressive magazine, The American Prospect. Dave has been following the back and forth over this bill quite closely. What's your sort of top line here about what the shape of the compromise that's come into focus is?
Well, I mean, I think you see temporary, necessary help for individual workers, whether it's the direct payments or the unemployment insurance boost. And you see long-term transformation of American society through a largely unrestricted bailout that is actually higher than meets the eye. I know what Representative Porter was saying was about what's in the bill, which says $500 for large, or $500 billion for large corporations. But a portion of that, most of that, $425 billion, goes, as I understand it, to the Federal Reserve as 10% of a credit facility that they build, which would total $4.25 trillion. That they could point as a money cannon at any large corporation they want. And that is just dwarfs any other support for small business or any other entity. And I really believe will be transformative in terms of what these large corporations will be able to do with that money.
Well, so let me give this what I've read as the sort of the best version of the argument for something like that is essentially we could find ourselves in a kind of domino situation in which this turns into a really gnarly credit crisis and financial crisis. If you have a lot of companies starting to go under, if you have a lot of bonds starting to tank, the credit markets have already been a little woolly, and no one's really to blame here. It's not like the banks with who took on all this leverage and screwed themselves and then got bailed out. everyone here just ended up with the virus running through the economy. Like, what's so bad about shooting money cannons at American business to keep it propped up?
Well, I mean, if it was a bailout because of the unfortunate situation that we're in, that would be certainly understandable. I think the money for hospitals who are in a really strapped situation is completely understandable, for example. This actually, to me, feels more like a bailout for a decade of irresponsibility. These are corporations that had record profits for 10 years, paid very little in taxes for 10 years, created the system that created this extreme vulnerability in the United States, which does not have the manufacturing capacity, has this system where inventory is seen as a luxury good, is seen as like something that's a cost center. It's created this system with leaking money out to investors, not investing in people, creating inequality, which puts people further on the edge in a sudden shock situation like this. And all of that is getting papered over without any conditions to change these terms in any way, these proclivities of the large business sector. There's no restrictions on the money. There's one very small restriction, but of course Secretary Mnuchin can override that at his will. These companies can give dividends out with this money. They can do mergers and acquisitions with this money. They can do virtually anything they want with this money. And if you see the parallels between this and the small business sector, which is going to be serviced by the Small Business Administration, one of the slowest agencies in the government, compared to the concierge service that the Federal Reserve is going to give these large banks and large corporations. What does the landscape of America look like after this bill is over? That's what I'm concerned about.
You know, that final point about, I'm worried, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez raised this point last night, which I thought was an interesting point because it's, not a left-wing point necessarily or a liberal point. It's just about the mechanics of this, which is, can the SBA do what it's going to be tasked with doing here? I mean, the volume that we're talking about, the number of small businesses, the amount of aid they're going to need, I'm just worried that the facility could be stood up and get to the people that need it in time to rescue them before they go under.
I mean, I think the run rate that the SBA is going to be dealing with is something like 13 to 14 times their annual budget, and they have to do it in weeks rather than over the course of a year. And you talk to small businesses right now, and that's just not the way this works. You could extend this parallel out to the fact that individuals who don't have direct deposit on file with the IRS might wait as much as 4 months for the direct payments. You can extend this to the fact that state unemployment insurance systems in some states are collapsing. They are not well-run systems, and they're going to have to deal with this huge boost in uninsurance and get it out to people. This is, you see the rickety parts of this system are what the small businesses and individuals have to deal with, and the strongest, most robust part of this system, the Federal Reserve, is who the large corporations get as their concierge.
That is very well put, Dave Dayen. Thank you for being with me.